I never expected that hiring a maid would change the way I saw myself, but life never announces the lessons it plans to teach. It began on a rainy morning when I sat by my apartment window, scrolling through job listings. I had just moved to a new city, leaving behind a job that drained my spirit and a family that never understood me. The place looked tidy enough on the outside, but inside, the disorganized chaos mirrored my thoughts. Clothes draped over chairs, dishes piled like collapsing ruins, and a lingering uncertainty seemed to fill every corner. I didn't want to admit it, but I needed help. I needed someone who could bring order where I could not. That was when I found the ad. Live-in maid services. At first, I hesitated. Hiring someone felt almost like admitting failure, like I couldn't handle life alone. Yet something pulled me toward it. Maybe I longed for structure, maybe for companionship, or maybe I already sensed that nothing would be the same. The message I sent was short, awkward, and honest. I'm looking for help. I don't know how long I'll need it.
Can we talk?
The reply arrived within minutes. The message introduced someone named Aiko. Her tone was calm and precise, explaining that she specialized in personal organization, wardrobe management, and emotional support. Emotional support? I wasn't sure what that meant, but I felt my chest tighten with relief. Without thinking further, I scheduled an interview for the next day. When Aiko arrived, my first impression was that she was striking. She had a quiet confidence, a posture too perfect to be accidental. Her voice flowed like water, gentle yet firm, and she spoke as if she had already observed every dusty thought on my shelves. She wore a simple black maid uniform, though it looked nothing like the theatrical outfits I had imagined. It was crisp and minimal. She removed her shoes neatly at the entrance and stepped in as if she had always belonged there. Her first words surprised me. "You live like someone waiting for their life to begin," she said. I wasn't sure whether to laugh or defend myself. Instead, I nodded. She walked through my apartment, taking in every detail without judgment, just quiet analysis. At the kitchen sink, she traced a fingertip along a ceramic plate before rinsing it clean, as though symbolic, like she was washing more than dishes. "Why did you call me?" she asked, setting the plate down to dry. "I don't know," I admitted. "Maybe because I'm tired. Maybe because I don't know who I'm supposed to be." She studied me with a gaze both soft and unyielding. "Then I see. You're not hiring a maid. You're inviting someone to take the reins." I almost protested. Instead, I found myself strangely relieved that she had said it for me. I agreed to let her stay for a 3-month trial. She nodded, though it felt like she had already known what I would choose. From the moment she moved in, the atmosphere shifted. She cleaned, yes, but it went deeper. She organized my clothing by color and shape, pressed shirts with meticulous care, and even rearranged my room in a way that made mornings feel lighter. My old clothing, mostly plain shirts and loose jeans, suddenly looked strangely dull next to the things she brought in. Soft flowing fabrics, delicate patterns, pieces that seemed too bold, too graceful for someone like me. One evening, Aiko summoned me from my room with a calm, commanding tone. She held up a neatly folded outfit. "I have decided your wardrobe needs refining," she said. "Today, you will try this." I opened my mouth to reject it, but something about her gaze made everything else fall away. I nodded, unsure why I felt like I was no longer in charge of my own decisions. In the privacy of my room, I unfolded the clothing. It was surprisingly elegant, a long, silky garment with a form that hinted at something unfamiliar yet comforting. I hesitated. I had never worn something like this before. I didn't know if it was fear or curiosity rising in me, but my hands were trembling. When I stepped out, Aiko waited. Her eyes softened slightly, then sharpened with appraisal.
"It suits you," she said.
"But you are hesitant."
"Why?"
I looked down. "I don't know who I'm supposed to be in this." "You are supposed to be you," she said calmly. "That is what you kept running from." I felt exposed. Yet somehow, her words anchored me. That night, I lay awake, wondering why I had let this stranger take such control. The answer slowly took shape. Because she made decisions I couldn't make. Because she saw things I refused to face. The next morning, She woke me early with quiet footsteps and a gentle knock. "Today we will continue," she said almost too casually. I didn't know what she meant. But the moment she pulled open my closet to reveal the reorganized contents, elegant fabrics, new silhouettes, colors I had never chosen, I felt my breath catch. She had already begun transforming me, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to stop her. The day after Aiko unveiled the newly arranged wardrobe, I woke with a curious mix of discomfort and anticipation. Sunlight filtered through the curtains, landing softly across the fabrics she had introduced into my life. They hung in a neat spectrum on the rack, their shapes subtly unfamiliar yet strangely welcoming. I lay still for a moment, listening to the quiet sounds of the apartment, the soft scrape of dishes being set out, the rhythmic sweep of a broom. Somehow, it felt as though my home was breathing differently, calmer, steadier. When I stepped out of my room, still in my old t-shirt and loose pants, Aiko turned toward me. "Good morning," she said, her voice gentle but precise. "Breakfast is ready." On the table stood 2 bowls of porridge, decorated with a careful drizzle of honey and slices of fruit arranged like a small sunburst. The thoughtful details startled me. No one had ever prepared my mornings with such care. We ate quietly. She observed, but never intruded on my silence. When she finally spoke, her words were measured. "Tell me, what felt uncomfortable about yesterday?" I looked down at the spoon in my hand. "I guess I'm not sure who I'm supposed to be," I said. "Wearing that outfit, it felt strange. Not wrong, but not familiar." She nodded. "It is natural to feel uncertainty when exploring yourself. But nothing you wear defines you. It only reveals possibilities." Something about that sentence softened the tension in my chest. I realized she wasn't pushing me anywhere. She was inviting me. The difference was subtle but important. After breakfast, she asked if I was willing to try another outfit, not to change me but to allow me to see myself differently. Her tone held no force, only calm encouragement. I hesitated, then agreed. In my room, she laid out a light blouse and tailored trousers, simple, clean, balanced, without any flamboyant elements. "Try these," she said. "Sometimes, the path towards self-understanding begins with quiet changes." I slipped into the clothes. They fit surprisingly well. She must have paid attention to measurements without my noticing. When I returned to the living room, she regarded me thoughtfully. "You look at ease," she said. "How does it feel?" "Comfortable," I admitted. "Like I'm allowed to be softer." She nodded, seeming pleased not with the clothing, but with my voice.
"Good.
That is your truth, not something I place upon you." We spent the afternoon organizing the apartment. Though she took the lead, she guided me rather than instructing me. She showed me how to fold clothes carefully, how to sort objects into categories that helped me understand my own habits. With each drawer we tidied, I felt like we were unearthing fragments of myself, things I had avoided confronting for years. At one point, we found an old box tucked beneath a shelf. I had nearly forgotten about it. Inside were remnants from my teenage years, a small notebook, a few photos, and a silky scarf I remembered buying once on impulse, but never daring to wear. I froze, staring at it. Aiko noticed.
"May I?" she asked.
When I nodded, she lifted the scarf delicately. "You bought this because it spoke to you," she said. "You kept it because you hoped one day you would feel brave enough to wear it." Her words struck deep. I didn't know how she saw so much, but I no longer felt exposed, only understood. She placed the scarf gently around my neck. The fabric felt cool, then warm as it settled. I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror, and the image startled me. It was subtle, nothing drastic, but something internal shifted. The scarf didn't transform me. It whispered that transformation was allowed. The following days unfolded steadily. Aiko tended to her work with quiet diligence, and I found myself joining her more and more. Together, we created routines: morning tea, afternoon cleaning, evening reflection. She never used words like should or must. Instead, she offered questions.
"What do you feel drawn to today?"
"What would make your space feel more like home?" In answering, I heard my own voice growing clearer. One evening, after we finished reupholstering an old chair, she sat across from me, hands resting lightly in her lap. "Do you remember what I said the first day?" she asked. "That you invited someone to take the reins." I nodded. She smiled softly. "I was wrong. You did not invite someone to take charge of your life. You invited someone to remind you that you can lead your own." I felt my breath catch. The shift was subtle but profound. I realized I had given her authority not because she claimed it, but because I needed a guiding presence. Now, she was offering that power back to me. "So tell me," she said, "what would you like to explore next?" I looked toward the wardrobe, the colors, the textures, the quiet promise they held. I wasn't afraid of them anymore, but I wasn't sure what step to take. I want to understand why I always felt unsafe being myself," I answered. Aiko nodded as though she had been waiting for those words. "Then tomorrow," she said, "we will begin there." The next morning arrived quietly, the kind where the sunlight feels unsure of itself and the air lingers before deciding whether to warm or chill. I woke earlier than usual, drawn by a faint aroma drifting from the kitchen. Aiko was preparing tea. She brewed it with a patience that slowed the room itself. When she saw me, she gestured for me to sit, pouring 2 cups with the steady precision that had become so familiar. "Today," she said, "we look inward." Her words felt simple, yet they carried weight. The steam curled in front of me, and I wrapped my hands around the cup, grounding myself. "What is it," she asked, "that makes you feel unsafe being who you are?" The question hung in the air. I didn't rush to fill it. Instead, memories surfaced like forgotten pages floating to the surface. I spoke slowly. I told her about the town where I'd grown up, where the word different carried a bitter edge. I told her about my family, about the pressure to blend in, to be practical, predictable, quiet. I remembered trying on clothing in secret, experimenting with softness and color, only to hide it away again. Each attempt at expression ended in retreat. Aiko listened without expression but with deep attention. And when I finished, she nodded, as though stitching my words into a quiet understanding. "Fear," she said, "often stays longer than the moment that created it. So we will build something stronger than fear." I didn't know what she meant, but the idea settled gracefully inside me. She suggested we spend the day not changing anything externally, but noticing. As we cleaned and sorted, she asked gentle questions. "When you look at this shirt, what do you remember? When you shy away from that mirror, what thought appears?" I didn't realize how many small stories I had attached to objects, spaces, even the way I moved through the apartment. Every hesitation had a reason, every preference a buried seed. In the afternoon, she asked me to stand in front of the mirror, not to judge, not to correct, just to see. She remained beside me, silent. I looked at myself, wearing the simple blouse and trousers from the day before. Nothing extravagant, nothing loud. Yet there was something newfound about the way I occupied the reflection. A quiet ownership. I noticed details I had never allowed myself to appreciate. The softness of the fabric against my shoulders, the line of my collarbone, the way my expression relaxed when I didn't brace for criticism. "What do you see?" she asked. I swallowed. "Someone who is trying," I said. She nodded. "Someone who is learning. That is strength." She asked if I wanted to try a new garment today, not to become someone else, but to explore again. I agreed. From the wardrobe, she selected a soft, lightweight cardigan with a gentle drape. Its color was a muted lavender, subtle enough that it didn't startle me, but warm enough to coax my curiosity. When I put it on, I felt an almost strange lightness, as though the garment didn't demand anything. It simply existed with me. Aiko guided me to the mirror once more. "Notice what changes inside," she murmured. "Not outside." I looked. I realized that the cardigan didn't transform my appearance dramatically. Instead, it shifted how I saw myself. I felt calm, like the garment gave me permission to breathe more gently. We spent the rest of the afternoon walking through a nearby park. It was the first time I had stepped outside wearing something chosen for my inner comfort rather than others' expectations. I expected the world to stare, but it didn't. People passed, wrapped in their own lives. Aiko walked beside me at an easy pace, never announcing herself, never guiding me unless I wavered. When we reached a small pond, she stopped. "Look at the water," she said. "See how it changes but still reflects what is real." The surface rippled gently, distorting and clarifying in a rhythm that made sense. I realized then that my discomfort came from believing I had to be static, fixed, unchanging. But maybe identity was more like water, shifting, adjusting, still true. On our way back, we stopped at a small shop. Aiko encouraged me to browse. I expected to freeze, overwhelmed by choices, but instead I found myself drawn to a light, airy scarf patterned with gentle lines. It wasn't bold, it wasn't loud, but when I touched it, something felt honest. Aiko noticed but didn't comment. She simply let me choose. For the first time, I purchased something not because it felt safe or invisible, but because it simply felt right. At home, I draped the scarf over a chair. I didn't feel the need to wear it immediately. Owning it was enough. It felt like a conversation with myself, one I had postponed for years. That evening after dinner, Aiko asked how I felt about the day. Lighter, I told her. Like the fear isn't gone, but it's not in charge. She smiled, not triumphant, but warmly, like someone witnessing a garden finally catching sun. Transformation begins quietly, she said. It is not something forced. It is something allowed. Before bed, I stood once more before the wardrobe. The garments no longer intimidated me. They simply waited, patient as the road ahead. I realized that what scared me wasn't the clothing, nor the world outside. It was accepting that I wanted to explore the parts of myself I had ignored. For the first time, I felt ready to continue. The next morning, I woke feeling clearer than I had in months, maybe years. The usual heaviness in my chest seemed lighter, as if someone had opened a window inside me. I slipped from bed and stepped into the hallway, catching the faint scent of freshly brewed tea. It had become part of the rhythm of my days, an unspoken reassurance that I wasn't navigating change alone. Aiko sat at the table, reading a small notebook. She looked up as I entered. "Good morning." Her voice was calm, a familiar anchor. She gestured toward my seat, and as I sat, she closed the notebook with deliberate care, as if saving its thoughts for later. "Today," she said, "I will teach you to listen to your instincts." The phrase surprised me. Instincts? I wasn't sure I had ever trusted them. Most of my life had been about avoiding missteps, blending in, minimizing attention. Instincts felt like something wild, something risky. But Aiko continued, her voice light. "When you chose the scarf yesterday, you did not analyze. You followed something quiet within you." I thought about that moment again. I remembered the texture beneath my fingertips, how I simply knew it belonged to me without needing to explain. It had felt natural, simple, and honest. After tea, Aiko suggested we go out again. Whatever feels right today," she said. I stood before the wardrobe longer than I expected, not because I was unsure, but because I could feel possibilities instead of obligations. My hand drifted to the lavender cardigan. I paired it with simple trousers and a new scarf, folding it gently around my neck. When I stepped out, Aiko nodded approvingly, not because it met some expectation, but because I looked comfortable in my own skin. We walked through the city streets, moving at an unhurried pace. The air was crisp, carrying hints of autumn. As we passed shop windows, I saw glimpses of my reflection, small flashes of myself in this new expression. It didn't feel like a costume. It felt like a quiet truth I had always dreamed I could wear. Aiko led us to a small tailor shop nestled between a bookstore and a bakery. Its windows displayed flowing garments in soft colors, nothing flamboyant, just thoughtful designs. Inside, the tailor, an older woman with silver hair and warm eyes, greeted Aiko like an old friend. I wondered how many people Aiko had guided before me. "This is Misa," Aiko said gently. "She will help you understand shape and comfort." I felt nervous, but Misa's presence eased me. She spoke kindly, asking questions not about who I was supposed to be, but about what felt natural. "Do you like when fabric moves with you, or do you prefer structure?" Do you feel more at ease in soft lines or clean angles? I had never considered such questions. Clothing had always been armor, not expression. Now it felt like language. Misa took a few measurements, her touch gentle, professional. She selected a few pieces for me to try. The first was a long tunic with subtle embroidery along the hem. When I put it on, I felt a quiet confidence. It flowed without drowning me. I stepped out, feeling uncertain but hopeful. Aiko studied me thoughtfully. What do you feel? I paused. I feel seen. It surprised me how true that felt. Misa smiled. Then it suits you. We tried several pieces that afternoon, not searching for perfection, but exploration. Some felt wrong, some felt nearly right. Each time I stepped out of the fitting room, Aiko didn't judge. She simply encouraged me to describe what I felt. It was the first time clothing wasn't about approval, it was about understanding myself. By the end of our visit, I chose 2 pieces that felt like quiet promises. As we left, Misa said, "Remember, clothing is not meant to hide you. It is meant to reflect you." Her words lingered like a thread tying the day together. Outside, the sun had begun to dip, painting the sky in warm oranges. Aiko suggested we walk home. Along the way, she spoke softly. "Do you notice how your steps have changed?" I hadn't, but as I paid attention, I realized I walked with a little more length in stride, a little more space around me, as if I no longer tried to shrink into emptiness. When we reached home, we prepared a simple dinner together. Chopping vegetables, arranging food. It all felt like part of the same journey. After we finished, Aiko asked if I wanted to reflect on the day. I nodded. Back in the living room, I described how trying different garments felt like reading different chapters of myself. Some fit, some didn't. But every attempt revealed something I hadn't known. Aiko listened with the same steady patience she always showed. "You are discovering how to trust your own voice," she said. As evening settled, I sat alone for a while, wrapped in the lavender cardigan. I thought about how far I had come in such a short time. Not in distance, but in honesty. The fear was still there, lingering gently like a shadow, but it no longer held the same control. Instead, there was curiosity, steady and growing. Before bed, I carefully hung the new garments, not out of obligation, but gratitude. I whispered a quiet thank you to the reflection in the mirror, not to the image, but to the courage that had begun to awaken. The world outside hadn't changed, but I had begun to see myself differently, and that made everything feel new. That night, I slept more deeply than I had in years. I didn't dream of running or hiding. Instead, I drifted through a quiet space where nothing chased me and nothing demanded I be different. When morning came, I felt a familiar nervousness, but it no longer weighed me down. It felt more like the fluttering sensation of opening a book you've long wanted to read. I stepped into the kitchen expecting to find Aiko already moving through her practiced routines, but she wasn't there. The kettle sat unused. Sunlight traced slow lines across the countertop. For a moment, I hesitated, unsure whether to call out for her. Then I noticed a small note resting beside an empty teacup. "Today, make tea for yourself." I felt a subtle warmth at the message, as if she were telling me that I could continue even without her guiding hand.
So I did.
I measured the leaves carefully, heated the water, and waited, listening to the quiet bubbling as if it were speaking. When the tea steeped, I poured it into a cup and sat at the table, feeling both alone and accompanied by something soft inside me. After a while, Aiko entered the room. She greeted me with a small, approving nod when she saw the cup in my hands.
"Good," she said.
"You took the first step on your own." There was no praise in her voice, only a calm acknowledgement, the kind that made me trust myself a little more. "Today's lesson," she continued, "will be about choice." We spent the morning reorganizing a section of the apartment I had avoided for months, a tall, narrow cabinet in the hallway filled with old memories. I had always kept the doors closed, unwilling to face whatever echoes waited behind them. But with Aiko beside me, the task felt less overwhelming. Inside were small pieces of the past, photographs, forgotten trinkets, a few clothes I hadn't touched in years. I felt a pang as memories rose like dust shaken into the light. Some belonged to times I missed, some to ones I wished I could forget. Aiko instructed me gently to pick up each item and ask myself whether it still held a place in the person I was becoming. For the first time, I didn't cling to everything. Some objects I set carefully aside, thanking them silently for the comfort or lessons they once offered. Others I held on to, not out of fear, but out of recognition that they still spoke to me. Near the bottom of the cabinet, I discovered a small wooden box. Inside lay several pieces of jewelry, delicate earrings and slender bracelets. I remembered buying them years ago, in a rare moment of boldness, only to tuck them away when doubt crept in. My breath caught. I held a small silver bracelet between my fingers. It felt cool, reassuring. Aiko watched quietly. "Do you feel anything when you touch it?"
she asked.
I nodded. "It feels like permission." "Then wear it," she said simply. Her tone carried no pressure. Instead, it offered a hand forward. I slipped the bracelet around my wrist. It was subtle, almost invisible beneath my sleeve. But I felt it, a reminder of the parts of myself I had buried. We moved through the apartment slowly. Each room became a space for choosing not what I thought I should keep, but what resonated. The process was oddly soothing, like untangling threads that had been knotted for too long. Around midday, Aiko suggested we take a break. She prepared a simple meal, rice, greens, and tofu, while I sat nearby, watching her move with quiet intention. It struck me how her presence had become a steady rhythm in my life, not commanding but guiding. I wondered again how she understood so much without needing to say it. After lunch, she handed me a small mirror, something I'd always avoided holding too long. "Sit," she instructed. I obeyed, feeling a faint nervousness. This time, she didn't ask me to wear anything new. Instead, she invited me to look at myself as I was. I held my gaze longer than I expected. I saw lines of hesitation, yes, but also softness I had never noticed. The lavender cardigan rested gently against my shoulders. The bracelet glinted subtly at my wrist. Somehow, these small adornments made me feel present. Aiko asked quietly, "What would you change, if anything?" I thought for a long moment. "Not my face," I said eventually. "Not the clothing. Maybe the way I look at myself." She nodded, as if the answer pleased her. "Change begins in how you see," she said. "Not in what you wear." That afternoon, we stepped outside again. Our destination was not a tailor or a store, but a small community studio where people gathered to create art. Inside, I found groups of strangers painting, sketching, sculpting silently. The air was filled with concentration, curiosity, and colors scattered like loose thoughts. Aiko guided me to an open table. "Paint something that feels like you today," she said. "Not who you were. Not who you wish to be. Just today." I hesitated, brush in hand. It felt strange to attempt art without a plan, but I dipped the brush in soft hues, lavender, pale blue, hints of warm gold, and simply moved with instinct. I painted shapes without words, impressions rather than images. When I finished, I looked at the canvas and felt strangely understood. It wasn't perfect or grand. It was gentle, quiet, honest. Aiko stood behind me, observing. "Beautiful," she murmured. "Because it is true." We left the studio in silence, a peaceful kind. As we walked home, the sky hung low with evening light. I felt grounded, more myself than I could remember being. Not because I had transformed into someone new, but because I had allowed myself to choose, to see, to feel. Back at the apartment, I placed the bracelet carefully on my nightstand before bed. I looked in the mirror one more time, noticing not perfection, but presence. The journey still felt long and uncertain, yet I no longer feared each step. For the first time, I trusted that I could walk it. The next morning arrived with a gentle drizzle tapping against the window. The soft rhythm felt comforting, like a reminder that growth didn't have to be loud. I lay in bed for a while, listening to the sound, before finally rising. When I stepped into the living room, I found Aiko standing near the window, watching the rain as if it were speaking. Good morning, she said without turning. Her voice blended into the quiet, calm and grounded. I joined her at the window, and we stood together, watching droplets streak down the glass. Rain invites reflection, she said. It asks us to pause. I nodded, understanding more than I could explain. The city outside seemed slower, softened beneath the gray sky. Even inside, the air felt thoughtful. After breakfast, Aiko invited me to sit at the table. Today, she said, I would like you to write. I blinked, surprised. Write what? Whatever comes, she replied. She placed a blank notebook before me, its cover simple and unassuming. The emptiness felt intimidating at first, but Aiko's steady presence made it feel safe. 2. She offered no instructions beyond the invitation to express whatever surfaced. I began slowly. At first, the words came haltingly, small memories, scattered feelings. Then something shifted. My hand moved with more certainty, the ink flowing into thoughts I hadn't known were waiting. I wrote about the child I once was, curious and open, before fear taught me to fold inward. I wrote about clothes I wished I could have worn, voices I wished I could have spoken with. I wrote about the years spent shrinking myself to fit into spaces that were never shaped for me. The room remained quiet as I wrote. When I finally paused, my hand ached, but in a strangely satisfying way, like a muscle waking after long stillness. I closed the notebook and let out a slow breath. How do you feel? Aiko asked. Relieved, I said. Tired, but lighter.
Good, she replied.
Sometimes, truth needs a place to land. She suggested we take a walk despite the rain. I hesitated, but she simply handed me a lightweight coat and opened the door. The rain wasn't harsh, just a soft, steady drizzle, like the city whispering. We walked in silence, our footsteps soft on the damp pavement. The world felt quieter, more intimate. As we walked, I noticed reflections in puddles, the lavender tones of my cardigan visible beneath the coat, the silver bracelet peeking from my sleeve. I felt surprisingly at ease. The rain-blurred edges softened the world until everything felt possible. Eventually, we reached a small cafe tucked beneath an awning. Inside, warmth enveloped us, scented with coffee and baked bread. We found a table by the window. I watched droplets slide down the glass, merging and splitting in unpredictable patterns. Aiko spoke softly. When rain falls, people look inward. The world slows, and truth rises to the surface. That is why we embrace days like this. I sipped warm tea, remembering the words I had written. For so long, I had feared facing myself. But now, the fear felt less like a wall and more like a doorway, one I could walk through when ready. After a while, Aiko asked if I would read something from my writing. I hesitated, unsure whether I wanted to expose those tender words. But her expression held only patience, not expectation. So I opened the notebook and chose a small passage, one about a childhood memory of trying on a flowing shirt that made me feel graceful, only to hide it when someone knocked at my door. As I read, my voice trembled, but I kept going. When I finished, the cafe felt quieter, as if listening too. Aiko nodded slowly. You honored yourself with those words, she said. And that is not a small thing. We sat a while longer, watching the rain. Then, without warning, Aiko asked, would you like to meet someone who understands? The question startled me. Who? A friend, she replied. Someone who helps others explore identity. Only if you choose. I considered her words. A slight knot formed in my stomach, not of fear, but anticipation. I nodded. Yes.
Good, she said.
Then we will visit tomorrow. On the walk home, the rain eased. The clouds lifted just enough for sunlight to edge through, glinting against wet pavement. Something about that small, quiet brightness settled inside me. Back at the apartment, Aiko suggested we spend the afternoon in calm preparation for tomorrow. She helped me try a few outfit combinations, nothing dramatic, just clothing that felt honest. Together, we explored colors and shapes, listening to instinct rather than rules. At one point, she guided me toward the mirror again. Look, she said gently. Not to judge. To recognize. I did. And for the first time, I didn't flinch. I simply saw myself still uncertain, still learning, but present.
Real.
The clothing didn't define me. It echoed something I was beginning to accept. That evening, I reread the words in my notebook. They felt raw but true. In them, I saw a thread, a quiet longing that had always been there, tugging at me. Before bed, I placed the notebook on my nightstand beside the bracelet. The two objects felt like markers of where I had been and where I was going. I lay under the covers, listening to the last faint whispers of rain. Tomorrow felt important. Not because something dramatic would happen, but because I would take another step, one chosen freely, one born from my own voice. As I drifted asleep, I whispered a quiet promise to myself. Keep listening. Keep opening.
Keep choosing.
I woke before sunrise, not from anxiety, but from a quiet excitement I hadn't felt in years. The city outside was still half asleep, wrapped in a soft blue haze. I sat up slowly, noticing the faint glow of street lamps through my window. Today, I would meet someone new, someone who might understand what I was beginning to uncover within myself. I ran my fingertips over the bracelet on my nightstand before slipping it onto my wrist. The metal felt cool but reassuring. I dressed carefully, guided by instinct rather than doubt. A soft shirt, the lavender cardigan, and simple trousers. I paused at the mirror, taking in my own reflection. It felt honest, unadorned yet intentional. Aiko waited in the living room, a small travel thermos and 2 cups beside her.
Good morning, she said.
Her tone carried a gentle note, different from her usual calm. Perhaps she sensed the significance of today. Are you ready? I nodded. She handed me the thermos, and we stepped outside. The air carried the freshness of last night's rain, the sky brightening slowly as we walked. We didn't take the usual route through the park or toward the city center. Instead, we ventured along quieter streets lined with older houses, where ivy curled along fences and morning glories opened shyly to the dawn. As we walked, Aiko spoke quietly. You are not the only one who has felt unsure of who they are. Many hide their truth for a long time. Some never find the courage to look inward. Today, you meet someone who helps others feel seen. Her words settled gently inside me. I realized how far I'd come, not only in appearance, but in the willingness to acknowledge my own feelings. We approached a modest house painted in soft cream, with a small garden blooming in front. A wind chime hung near the door, tinkling softly. Aiko knocked. After a moment, the door opened, revealing a person with warm eyes and an easy smile. Their presence felt comforting immediately, as though they had been expecting me, not just as a guest, but as someone familiar. Welcome, they said. My name is Ren. Please come in. Inside, the house felt lived in, layered with quiet stories. Shelves filled with books and small sculptures lined the walls. Sunlight filtered through gauzy curtains, casting soft patterns across the wooden floor. I felt myself relax, sensing that this space had been created for gentle discovery. Ren gestured for us to sit. Aiko remained nearby, but quietly, letting Ren take the lead. Ren began with simple questions: how I had been feeling lately, what had prompted my journey. I spoke slowly, sharing how I'd always struggled to express certain parts of myself, how fear had kept me from exploring, and how Aiko's guidance had helped me begin to listen inwardly. Ren nodded thoughtfully. Identity, they said, is not a destination but a landscape. You walk through it, learn its paths, rest when needed. Some days are bright, others are unclear. All of it is part of knowing yourself. Their voice carried a soothing honesty. For the first time, I felt fully understood, not in a theoretical way, but in the way two people recognize familiar shapes in each other's stories. Ren asked if there were moments when I remembered feeling most myself. The question surprised me. I searched inward, tracing memories like threads. I told them about trying on clothing in private as a child, moments when I felt graceful, at ease, even joyful. I told them how quickly those moments dissolved into fear of being seen, fear of judgment, of being told I was wrong. I spoke about the silence that followed, Years of swallowing parts of myself. Run listened intently. Those memories, they said, are not accidents. They are truths you tucked away to stay safe. Now you are retrieving them. A warmth spread through me, a recognition that what I had hidden wasn't shameful, it was precious. Aiko brought us tea, setting the cups gently on the table before stepping back once more. Ren asked if I wished to explore expression more openly. Not in front of anyone else, not as a performance, but for myself. I hesitated, noting an old fear flicker. But then I remembered the way the lavender cardigan felt, the soft confidence it gave. I nodded. Ren led us to a small room filled with clothing, not costumes, but thoughtful garments of varying styles. Flowing fabrics hung beside structured jackets. Soft scarves lay folded beside trousers and skirts. The sight didn't overwhelm me. It felt like possibility. Choose something, Ren said gently, something that speaks to you. Don't think, listen. I walked slowly through the room, fingertips brushing fabrics. Colors and textures murmured, but one garment caught my attention, a long, soft top with gentle pleats down the front. It was neither loud nor plain, just balanced, like a quiet voice that knew its strength. I lifted it carefully. Ren nodded.
Try it.
I stepped into a small changing space, and as I slipped into the garment, I felt a warmth blossom inside, a subtle shift, not dramatic, but unmistakably real. When I stepped out, Run and Aiko waited. They didn't react with surprise or fanfare. Instead, they both regarded me with quiet recognition. How does it feel? Ren asked. I placed a hand over my chest, feeling the soft fabric beneath my palm. Like I've stopped hiding, I said. Ren smiled gently. That is not about clothing. That is about truth. Something inside me loosened, as though a knot I'd carried for years finally began to unravel. I looked in a nearby mirror. The person reflected back felt familiar, not because I had seen them before, but because I had always known they were there. We spent the rest of the morning talking, not about labels or decisions, but about compassion, curiosity, and patience. Ren explained that identity unfolds over time, and that my journey was mine alone, without deadlines or expectations. Before we left, Ren handed me a small card with their number. Whenever you feel uncertain or simply want to reflect, call, they said. You are not alone. The walk home felt different than the walk there. The air seemed lighter, the world more open. I felt grounded in a way I hadn't before, not because I had all the answers, but because I finally allowed myself to ask the right questions. Back at the apartment, Aiko placed a hand lightly on my shoulder. Today, she said, you met someone who saw you. But more importantly, you saw yourself. I nodded, feeling the words settle deeply. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of what I might discover next. In fact, I looked forward to it. In the days that followed, the world around me felt newly textured. The same rooms I walked through every morning, the same streets I had traveled countless times, now seemed to contain hidden pathways, possibilities I'd never noticed before. I found myself paying attention to small things, the way sunlight caught on the edge of a cup, the soft whisper of fabric as I moved, the quiet comfort of my own breath. It was as though my senses had widened to accommodate a growing awareness inside me. Aiko's presence became gentler, less guiding, and more companion-like. She no longer prompted me toward choices. Instead, she asked thoughtful questions that encouraged me to explore my own feelings. What feels right to you today? What are you curious about? What brings you peace? These questions lingered in my mind long after they were asked, nudging me toward inner conversation. One morning, she told me we would be spending time outside the apartment, not for lessons or introductions, but simply to observe. She believed that transformation wasn't only about the inner landscape, but also about how we interacted with the world around us. We left early, a pale morning sun stretching long shadows across the pavement. The city was slowly waking, storefronts unlocking, bicycles weaving through quiet streets, neighbors greeting one another with small nods. We walked with no particular destination, letting the ebb and flow of the city guide us. I noticed how people carried themselves, some with confidence, others with hesitation. Some seemed absorbed in their own worlds, while others moved with deliberate intention. Aiko said nothing at first. She simply walked beside me, hands loosely held behind her back, eyes always observing. Eventually, we paused near a small cafe tucked between a tailor shop and a bookstore. The sign above the entrance had faded, but the window was filled with fresh pastries and handwritten menus.
Let's go in, she said.
Inside, warm air wrapped around us, carrying the scent of baked bread and roasted coffee. We found a small table near the back. The walls were covered with framed photographs, snapshots of the cafe through various seasons, laughter among friends, soft snow falling over the entrance. It felt familiar in an instant, though I had never been there before. A barista approached, smiling warmly. Her eyes flickered to my outfit. Today I had chosen a soft navy sweater over the pleated top, paired with comfortable trousers. There was no shock, no questioning. Just a simple, "I love that color on you. What can I get started for you?" The compliment came naturally, without hesitation, and I felt my shoulders relax. We ordered tea and a small pastry to share. As we waited, I studied the people around us, some alone, some in pairs, some working quietly. Everyone seemed absorbed in their own rhythm, yet the atmosphere knitted us together in an unspoken sense of community. "How do you feel?" Aiko asked after a while. I thought about it carefully.
"Present," I said.
"Like I'm not trying to shrink myself." Her eyes softened. "Good. That is a feeling worth noticing." When the tea arrived, steam curled gently upward, and I wrapped my hands around the warm cup. The calmness settled deeper. For a moment, I thought back to earlier years, the times I longed for this feeling but didn't know where to find it. I had always assumed comfort came from fitting in, but it was becoming clear that comfort grew from being truthful with myself. After we finished, we lingered near the window, watching people pass. One person walked by wearing a flowing scarf, another with a short cropped haircut and bright painted nails. I wondered about their stories, their journeys, and whether they, too, had moments of clarity that shifted their lives. Eventually, we left the cafe and drifted toward a nearby park. The sky had brightened, and children were playing near a fountain. Aiko guided me toward a bench under a broad tree. As we sat, she spoke in a voice that carried both gentleness and a certain gravity. "Your journey is shifting," she said. "You are listening more deeply, not only to your thoughts, but to your emotions. This is good. But every step forward also reveals areas of uncertainty. There may be days when you feel lost again. That does not mean you are moving backward. It only means you are still learning." I nodded, absorbing her words. I thought about my meeting with Ren, the reflection I saw in the mirror, and how grounding it felt. Yet there was still a quiet fear. What if that certainty faded? What if doubt returned stronger? Aiko seemed to sense my unease. She reached into her small shoulder bag and pulled out a simple journal, bound in soft fabric. She offered it to me. "For your thoughts," she said. "When your feelings become tangled, write them. When something sparks joy or curiosity, write it too. Over time, these pages will become a map of your journey." I ran my hand across the cover. It felt sturdy, yet gentle. I opened it to the first page, blank and full of possibility. I wrote the date at the top, hesitating before letting the pen glide forward. Instead of trying to capture everything all at once, I wrote a single sentence: "I am learning to see myself." We spent the rest of the afternoon in quiet reflection. I wrote in the journal, sometimes only a few words, other times entire streams of thought. Aiko walked nearby, occasionally sitting beside me, reading or simply watching the rhythm of the park. At one point, I noticed a group gathered on the far side of the park. They seemed to be rehearsing a performance, voices rising, laughter echoing. Curiosity tugged at me, and I stood, drifting closer. It was a small community theater group practicing a scene. Their movements were expressive, embodying different characters with ease. I found myself mesmerized by their freedom, the way they embraced transformation through performance. Aiko stood beside me silently, watching my reaction. After a while, she asked, "Would you like to try something like this someday? Acting, I mean. Or anything that lets you express yourself outwardly." I felt a spark of excitement followed by uncertainty. Maybe, I said quietly. I've always liked stories. And characters. Those moments when someone becomes a version of themselves they've never met before. She smiled. Transformation can take many forms, she said. Clothing, expression, creativity. None are more or less valid than another. What matters is that you explore what calls to you. Later, as the sun dipped lower, we returned home. The quiet of the apartment welcomed us. I set the journal on the table, feeling a quiet pride settle over me, not because I had completed something, but because I had begun. That evening, Aiko prepared a simple dinner. We ate quietly, comfortable in the shared silence. Afterward, I found myself standing before the mirror again, not out of uncertainty, but curiosity. I looked at my reflection, noticing how my gaze no longer darted away. Instead, I met my own eyes with a softness I hadn't known before. You are growing, I whispered, not as affirmation but simple truth. The days continued, each bringing small discoveries. I tried new outfits, wrote regularly in my journal, and rehearsed thoughts I once kept hidden. The fear didn't disappear completely, but it no longer held the same weight. It had become a companion, one that nudged me forward rather than pushing me back. One evening, as rain tapped lightly against the windows, I found myself thinking of Ren. Their calm wisdom lingered in my thoughts. I wondered what they would think of my progress, the small shifts in how I moved through the world. The thought gave me courage, allowed me to trust that the path ahead would keep unfolding as it needed to. Though the transformation was slow, it felt deeply real, an unfolding rather than a sudden change. And beneath it all, a quiet truth began to take shape. I was not trying to become someone new. I was allowing myself to become someone I had always been. 2 weeks passed in a quiet rhythm that felt strangely new yet deeply comforting. I woke each morning with a sense of gentle purpose, even if I didn't always know where the day would lead. My journal pages began to fill, some with careful thoughts, others with messy emotions I barely understood. On certain days, I traced my reflection in the mirror with tentative eyes. On others, I looked confidently, allowing the person evolving inside me to meet the world without apology. One morning, as I sipped tea at the kitchen table, Aiko placed a small envelope in front of me. It was sealed with a pressed flower, pale blue petals preserved beneath a delicate film.
For you, she said.
Her voice held a calm gravity. I opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a short note from Ren, written in a flowing hand. There is a gathering this weekend. A safe space for expression, conversation, and community. I believe you are ready. If you wish, I would be honored if you came. Beneath the note was an address, somewhere I didn't recognize, and a small card with a painted symbol, a simple circle surrounded by small, radiating lines, like a sun drawn by a child. A mixture of excitement and apprehension fluttered through me. A gathering.
People.
Faces. Voices. Questions. Conversation. I imagined a room full of strangers who might see parts of me I was still learning to show. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. Aiko waited quietly, letting me absorb the meaning. Finally, I looked up. Do you think I'm ready? Her answer came without hesitation. I think you already stepped onto the path. This is simply another step. But the choice is yours. I held the card in my hand. My fingers tightened around it. I could feel my heartbeat quicken, not in panic, but in anticipation. I wanted to go. There was fear, yes, but it felt like the kind of fear that comes before something meaningful. I'll think about it, I said. Over the next few days, I found myself returning to the note again and again. Sometimes I tucked it into my journal. Other times, I carried it in my pocket, feeling its presence like a quiet pulse. I tried to imagine what the gathering would be like, but my mind painted only fragments. Soft conversation, quiet laughter, shared stories. I wondered if I would be able to speak about my journey openly, or if I would still protect parts of myself. On the morning of the event, I woke early. Rain clouds pressed low in the sky, and a gentle drizzle tapped against the window. I stood before the closet, fingers grazing fabrics as I considered what to wear. The question wasn't about presentation. It was about truth. What felt like me today? I chose a soft cream top layered with a long, muted green cardigan, paired with simple trousers. I didn't feel the need to question it. It felt right. I paused before the mirror, brushing my hair gently. There was no dramatic transformation, no grand gesture, just an honest reflection that felt both familiar and new. Aiko entered the room and studied me for a moment. Her eyes warmed, and she nodded, as though acknowledging an unspoken step. "Ready?" she asked. I nodded. We took a quiet train ride across the city. The windows blurred with rain, turning the passing scenery into watercolor. I held my journal in my lap, fingers tracing the embossed threads on its
Cover.
I reminded myself that I had chosen this, that I wasn't being pushed or guided by anyone but myself now. The train slowed. Doors slid open. We stepped into a quieter part of the city where trees lined the streets and rain-soaked leaves clung to the pavement. Following the address, we arrived at a small building with a wooden sign shaped like the same sun symbol on the card. The entrance was simple, almost ordinary, yet it radiated a gentle warmth. Aiko squeezed my shoulder reassuringly. "I'll be nearby."
"Inside is your space," she said.
I swallowed and nodded. When I opened the door, a soft bell chimed. Warm air enveloped me, carrying the faint scent of incense and tea. The room was filled with soft light. Paper lanterns hung from the ceiling, glowing like tiny moons. Cushions and chairs were arranged in small circles, creating gentle pockets where people sat talking quietly. Ren noticed me and approached with a calm smile. "I'm glad you came," they said. Their presence eased some of the tension inside me. They guided me to a small circle where a few others sat, each person expressing themselves in their own way. One wore a tailored jacket with intricate embroidery, another wore flowing pants and a soft shawl, a third had short hair dyed vibrant teal. They looked up and greeted me with gentle nods and warm smiles. As I settled onto a cushion, I felt a tremor of nerves. But the atmosphere was calm, welcoming. No one stared or questioned. Instead, conversation flowed naturally, a mosaic of stories shared not for display, but for connection. A person across from me spoke about how they found freedom in quiet self-expression, how even small choices felt revolutionary. Another talked about writing poetry to understand their emotions. I listened, feeling the threads of their stories intertwine with my own. When it came to me, there was a quiet pause. I took a breath. My voice felt tentative, but steady. I told them about how uncertainty had followed me through life, how I finally met someone who offered guidance, not through direction, but through listening. I described the slow process of peeling back layers, of seeing myself in the mirror with new eyes. I told them about Ren, the journal, the park, and the mornings spent allowing small truths to surface. As I spoke, the room remained still, no interruption, no judgment. When I finished, there was a moment of quiet, not of awkwardness, but of recognition. "Thank you," someone said softly. Their eyes were kind. A warmth spread through me, subtle but deep. I wasn't alone. My story wasn't strange or unwelcome. It was simply another thread in the tapestry of human identity. The gathering continued with gentle activities, sharing prompts, quiet reflection, moments of silence where everyone rested in their own thoughts. At one point, Ren invited anyone who wished to express themselves through creative means, writing, sketching, or simply sitting quietly. I opened my journal and wrote without thinking. I am learning to hear my heart without shielding it. When the gathering neared its end, Ren stood before us and offered a simple reflection. We are not here to become someone new, but to remember who we've always been. Identity is not a mask. It is a form of truth. And truth is patient. Their words settled over us like a soft blanket. As people began to leave, several approached me with gentle words, gratitude, encouragement, understanding. These weren't grand speeches or dramatic gestures, just small, sincere expressions that felt profoundly grounding. Outside, the rain had stopped. The air smelled fresh, like the world had been rinsed clean. Aiko waited beneath a tree, her umbrella folded at her side. When she saw me, she offered a quiet smile.
"How do you feel?"
she asked. I searched for an answer and found only one: seen. She nodded, as though she'd been waiting for that word. The walk to the train was quiet, but not empty. My heart felt full in a way it had never been, not with certainty, but with peace. Back home, I sat at the table and wrote in my journal until the page filled. Aiko brewed tea and joined me, reading quietly while I wrote. We didn't speak much. We didn't need to. Late that night, as I stood before the mirror, I didn't overanalyze my reflection. I simply looked, really looked, and saw a person still unfolding, still learning, still walking the winding path toward truth. And for the first time, the uncertainty didn't scare me. I embraced it. I woke the next morning to a quiet stillness that felt both fragile and full. The sky outside held a soft light, the kind that appears just before dawn fully arrives. I lay there for a while, listening to the muffled hum of the city waking, distant engines, a lone bird, the rustle of leaves from the window's edge. Everything felt slower, steadier, like time itself had softened to allow room for whatever was coming next. When I finally rose, I moved through the apartment with a sense of gentle certainty. Every step felt grounded, every breath deliberate. The events of the previous day, the gathering, the stories, the way I felt seen without having to explain myself, lingered within me like embers still glowing. Aiko was already at the kitchen table when I entered, her hands wrapped around a warm cup of tea. She looked up, her expression calm yet attentive.
"Good morning," she said.
"Morning," I replied, noticing how natural my voice felt. Not forced, not hidden, simply present. I poured myself a cup of tea, the steam curling up into the quiet space between us. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she asked, "How are you feeling today?" I thought about it carefully, letting the question settle before answering.
"Steady," I said.
Like I'm beginning to understand myself, not all at once, but piece by piece. She nodded, as though this was exactly what she hoped to hear. "That is enough," she said. "You are learning to trust your own pace." We spent the morning in companionable silence. After breakfast, I retreated to my room and stood before the mirror. I didn't approach it with hesitation or expectation. I simply stood, looking at the person reflected back. A quiet realization settled over me. The mirror was no longer an adversary. It had become a witness. I reached for the soft cream top and green cardigan I had worn the day before. Today, though, I added a simple scarf in muted rose tones. As I wrapped it loosely around my neck, I felt a gentle assurance ripple through me. Nothing about the gesture was dramatic. It was just another quiet acknowledgement of who I was becoming. When I stepped back into the living room, Aiko looked up. There was no surprise in her eyes, only recognition. The kind that sees truth without needing explanation. "Would you like to go out for a walk?" she asked. I nodded. Yes, I would. Outside, the morning air was crisp, washed clean by the rain that had fallen through the night. The streets were damp, reflecting the pale sky. We walked without hurry, letting the city unfold around us. A bakery had just opened, and the door released waves of warm bread and vanilla into the street. A cyclist passed, their scarf trailing in the wind. Children raced along a sidewalk, their laughter echoing. Everything felt more vivid, not because the world had changed, but because I had. As we walked, Aiko spoke softly. "You've learned to listen to yourself. That is a rare gift, one many never allow themselves. You followed your curiosity, your fear, your questions. You let them guide you instead of cage you." I listened, feeling her words settle deep inside. "Do you remember the day we first met?" she asked. I nodded. I had been unsure, afraid, unsteady. I hadn't known how to begin. I barely knew what I was searching for. "You hired me to help create order," she continued. "To clean and organize, to make your space feel less overwhelming. But what you needed was to make space within yourself. A space for truth, for curiosity,
For compassion.
That is what you've done." We paused near a small bridge overlooking a shallow river. Water flowed slowly beneath us, carrying fallen leaves along its surface. I leaned on the railing, watching them drift, never fighting the current, simply moving with it. You once asked me if you were ready, she said. Ready for what this journey would bring. I could not answer then, not because I didn't know, but because readiness is not something given. It is something realized. I turned to her.
And now?
She smiled softly. Now you know you are ready. I felt the truth in her words, not as a revelation, but as a recognition. The fear that had once wrapped itself tightly around my heart had loosened. I no longer felt like I was hiding or apologizing for things I barely understood. I was simply becoming. We continued our walk, eventually winding toward a familiar park. The trees shimmered with morning dew, their leaves shifting in the gentle breeze. I found the bench beneath the broad tree, where I had written in my journal weeks before, and sat. Aiko stood beside me for a moment, then took a seat. The quiet stretched between us, soft and inviting. There is one more thing, she said at last. I turned to her, curious. I will be leaving soon. Her words caught me off guard. Leaving? The word echoed in my mind, hollow at first, then filling with a quiet ache. I felt a flicker of panic, but she lifted a hand gently. Not because you have failed, she said, but because you have grown. My purpose here was to help you see the path within yourself, to guide you until you could take your own steps. You have done that. More than you know. I looked down, processing her words. The thought of her leaving felt like losing a tether, a hand I had held through the uncertainty. But beneath the ache was understanding. She had been a guide, not a crutch. And guides do not stay forever. Where will you go? I asked. She smiled. Wherever I am needed. There are others who are waiting to begin their own journeys. People who feel lost or uncertain, as you once did. I felt my throat tighten, not with grief, but gratitude. Will I see you again? I asked quietly. Her gaze softened. In ways that matter, you always will. I am not a chapter that ends. I am part of your story. You carry the lessons now, the clarity, the courage. Those will not leave you. She placed her hand over mine. Remember, this path is yours. Walk it with honesty, with kindness, with curiosity. I swallowed, nodding slowly. Thank you, I said, for everything. She rose and I stood with her. The morning light caught her face, washing it in a soft glow. She looked at me, not as someone who needed guidance, but as someone who had found their own direction.
Take care of yourself, she said.
And then, with a gentle nod, she walked away, across the park, disappearing into the soft line of trees. I watched until she was gone, feeling both the ache of parting and the quiet certainty of continuation. I sat back on the bench, breathing deeply. The river murmured, leaves rustled, and the world continued in its quiet rhythm. I opened my journal and wrote, I am still becoming.
And that is enough.
Closing the journal, I stood and walked toward home, not because I needed to return, but because I wanted to. The streets no longer felt like familiar pathways I wandered without purpose. They felt like open roads, leading toward a future I could shape with my own hands. At home, I set the journal on the table and made tea. I stood at the window, watching the world below, a world that no longer felt distant or indifferent. A world I was ready to step into more fully. My reflection caught in the window's glass, not sharp, not defined, but clear enough to see the person I had become.
Soft, steady, honest.
There was no final revelation, no grand transformation. Just the understanding that I was living my truth, day by day. And that was enough. As the light shifted and the city beyond began to stir once more, I felt a quiet certainty bloom inside me. The journey wasn't ending. It was continuing, open, uncertain, beautiful. And I was ready.